Now, let's start from ownership, okay? Okay, so there is already the answer here, but anyway, so um, the question that we can ask is the following. So, as you know, companies are the ownership of the company, especially the ownership of corporation, meaning company that have more than one owners, where more than one people own shares of capital in the company. The ownership of a company depends on so who is the owner of Fiat. The owner of Fiat is Famiglia Agnelli. Why is Famiglia Agnelli? Because it's the subject that owns the larger share of capital that is associated with the company. Okay, so it's the main shareholder in a sense. And the idea is that if you own a large share of capital, you are in particular the one that owns the larger share of capital, you are also the ones that have greater control and has more authority in deciding what to do in the company. So in a sense, you are the owner that can use the power that is given from the fact that you own a large share of the company capital in order to tell other people what to do in the company. Okay, this is again, I'm simplifying, but this is the idea. Now, the question then, if this is the case, and we apply this to multinational companies, then the question that we can ask is, what is actually the percentage of foreign assets that must be owned by the main company for the latter to have control? Okay, so again, suppose that I'm acquiring some shares of capital in the Chinese company producing shoes, okay, as my previous example. And suppose there are three different scenarios, okay? In this company, of course, there are already people owning some share of the capital. And after my investments, we end up in one of these three different scenarios. In the first one, I own 40% of the company, and there are 6 other associates that own 10%. In the second scenario, I own 40%, and there are 2 other associates that own 30%. In the third scenario, I own 10%, and there are 90 associates that own 1% each. According to you, which is in these three different scenarios the ones in which I have greater control on the foreign company? Scenario 1, scenario 2, or scenario 3? Okay. Okay, so Jacopo, I didn't see your message before. I hope now it works better, my communication. And I'll try to speak more slowly. As I said at the beginning, this is one of my personal problem. I speak too fast. But anyway, I'll try to go slower. So Jacopo is saying is scenario is number 3. Nicolo says first scenario 1, then scenario 3. Okay, a little bit better. So let's do step by step. So let's compare first scenario 1 and scenario 2, just to give an idea. In both of them, I own 40%. So my share is the same. Is it no? So is it my share sufficient to define control? If that is the case, then my ability to manage, or the control that I have on the foreign company should be the same in scenario 1 and scenario 2, because in both of them I'm owning 40% of foreign capital. However, in one of them there are 6 other associates with 10% each. In the second one there are only 2 other associates with 30% each. So according to you, comparing 1 and 2 is the same, or there are some, in one of the 2 I have greater control? Some of you want to try? None of you. So is it just the same that uh, I own 40% and there are just 6 other people, or I own 10%, there are 2 people? It's just the same. Niccolo is saying no. According to him, one is better because you have to deal with fewer associates. Fewer. Well, no, in one you have to deal with more associates. Okay, you have to deal with 6 associates. In scenario 2, you have to deal with only 2 associates. But the answer is correct. So, comparing scenario 1 and scenario 2, I have greater control in scenario 1, even though in both of them I own 40%. Why? Well, because in scenario 2, the 2 other associates can very easily coordinate and put me in minority when we vote, for instance, okay, in the company board, because each of them has 30%. So for them, there are just 2 of them. It's very easy to put me in minority and rule out my decisions. On the contrary, in scenario 1, there are 6 other associates. So to rule me out, you need that at least 4 of them coordinate their decisions and put me in minority. Okay, but of course that is not that easy, because I can also try to take some of the other associates on my side. So it's much more difficult in scenario 1 for the other people to put me in minority rather than in scenario 2. Okay, so scenario 2, between scenario 1 and scenario 2, scenario 1 is the one that ensures to me the higher degree of control. Now, if we add into the picture scenario 3, of course the situation is also different. Okay, well, because in this case I own much less. I own just the 10%, but I have to deal with 90 other associates, okay, each of which has 1% of the share. So in this case, to rule me out, you need that if I don't do anything, that at least 10 associates, they kind of find a way to coordinate their decisions and rule me out. But this is the case only if I don't do nothing. I can also be active in the board, trying to find some other people and bring these other people on my side. So in that case, it's highly likely that to rule me out, you need to have at least 20, 30, if not 40 people coordinating their decisions to rule me out. So in a sense, it's a bit of a paradox, because in scenario 3 I have the lowest share, but when I'm compared with 90 other associates that are very small, because each of them has just 1%, this implies that probably it is actually scenario 3, the one in which I have greater control. Okay? So this is to say what? Well, it is to say that 2 things. First, it is very difficult to establish a link between share in capital and actual control, because it depends on how the shares are distributed, which therefore will imply that we should go, for each company, we should check not only who is the main shareholder, but also how the other shares are distributed across among all the other shareholders. Okay, which is very complex. If we want, for instance, if we are an international organization that needs to build up some statistics about multinational companies worldwide, because there are millions of multinational companies, and it's impossible to go in each balance sheet and check all these things. In particular, because the distribution of shares change day by day, depending on how these shares are traded in the stock market. Okay, so we need to find a way to classify firms as multinational company that is as simple as possible, and also that can be operational, that can be implemented or operationalized in a simple way. And that's the reason why, at the end of the story, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which is the main international organization that deals with data about multinational companies, alongside UNCTAD, and we will see what UNCTAD is. UNC, it's a UN agency. They had to find out a sort of like a measure that can be simply implemented, can be used by anybody in order to at least have a rough distinction between multinational and non-multinational company. And the EMF sets the minimum of 10% of share of ownership for the main company to be considered sufficient to have control. Okay, so if you are an Italian company and you invest in a Chinese company and you buy less than 10%, you are not classified as a multinational company. If you buy a foreign shares up to 10%, and this 10% allows you to be the main shareholder in the foreign company, even though you have just the 10%, independently of how the remaining 90% are distributed. But of course, if you are the main shareholder, it means that there is no other shareholder with more than 10%. So all the other 90 must be distributed in a fairly distributed way. I mean, they are maybe they're not all other 90 associates 1%, but they have fairly low shares, each of them. So anyway, independent of what I was saying, if you are buying foreign share up to 10%, and with this 10% you are able to become the main shareholder of the foreign company, this implies that your firm will be classified as a multinational company. Okay? Notice that, again, this is a very rough measure because we are not considering the ability to manage condition. Okay? We are only basing our classification on ownership. But this is the only thing that we actually can observe in the data. Okay? That's the reason why the EMF set the minimum at this. Yes?
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yes, please, do.
I wanted to ask, if the minimum is 5%, 10%, what if you have 5% of the shares, but it makes you, it means that you have the highest among them?
No, I mean, you need to have the 10%, okay? But this 10% must be enough to be the main shareholder. So it implies all the other people owning shares, they have less than 10%.
So what if 5% makes you a main shareholder?
This is not enough to be classified, according to EMF, is not enough to be classified as a multinational company. If you are the main shareholder, but you own only 5%, this is, according to the EMF condition, you are not classified as a multinational company. Okay? You need to have at least 10%. And 10% must be sufficient to be the main shareholder. Of course, if you have 50%, it's clear. If you have 40% and you are not the main shareholder, this implies you are not a multinational company, okay? Because you need to be the main shareholder and you need to have at least 10%.